OS exceptions. The following exceptions are subclasses of OS error. They get raised depending on the system error code. Exception: blocking IO error, raised when an operation would block on an object. Example: socket set for non-blocking operation corresponds to error number EA gain, EA, E already, E would block, E in progress. In addition to those of OS error, blocking IO error can have one or more attributes. Characters underscore return, an integer containing the number of characters returned to the stream before it blocked. This attribute is available when using the buffered IO classes from the IO module. Exception: child process error, raised when an operation on a child process failed, corresponds to error number E child. Exception: connection error, a base class for connection related issues. Subclasses are broken pipe error, connection aborted error, connection refused error, and connection reset error. Exception: broken pipe error, a subclass of connection error raised when trying to write on a pipe while the other end has been blocked, or trying to write on a socket which has been shut down for writing, corresponding to error number E pipe and E shutdown. Exception: connection aborted error, a subclass of connection error raised when a connection attempt is aborted by the peer, corresponds to error number E connect con aborted. Exception: connection refused error, a subclass of connection error raised when a connection attempt is refused by the peer, corresponds to error number E connect connection refused. Exception: connection reset error, a subclass of connection error raised when a connection is reset by the peer, corresponds to error number E connection reset. Exception: file exist error, raised when trying to create a file or directory which already exists, corresponds to error number E exist. Exception: file not found error, raised when a file or directory is requested but doesn't exist, corresponds to error number E no ent. EONNT. Exception: interrupted error, raised when a system call is interrupted by an incoming signal, corresponds to E interrupt. Changed in version 3.5, Python now retries system calls when a system call is interrupted by a signal, except if the signal handler raises an exception instead of raising interrupted error. Exception is a directory error, raised when a file operation such as os.remove is requested on a directory, corresponds to error number E is dir. Exception: not a directory error, raised when a directory operation such as os.list_dir is requested on something which is not a directory. On most POSIX platforms, it may also be raised if an operation attempts to open or traverse a non-directory files as if it were a directory, corresponds to error number E not dir. Exception: permission error, raised when trying to run an operation without the adequate access rights. For example, file system permissions, corresponds to error number E access, E perm, and E not capable. Exception: process lookup error, raised when a given process doesn't exist, corresponds to error E srch. Exception: timeout errors, raised when a system function timed out at the system level, corresponds to error number E timeout. Warnings. The following exceptions are used as warning categories. See the warning categories documentation for more details. Exception: warning, base class for warning categories. Exception: user warning, base class for warnings generated by user code. Exception: deprecation warning, base class for warnings about deprecated features when those warnings are intended for other Python developers, ignored by the default warning filters except in the main module. Enabling the Python development mode shows this warning. The deprecation policy is described in PEP 387. Exception: pending deprecation warning, base class for warnings about features which are obsolete and expected to be deprecated in the future but are not deprecated at the moment. This class is rarely used as emitting a warning about a possible upcoming deprecation is unusual, and deprecation warning is preferred for already active deprecations. Ignored by the default warning filters, enabling the Python development mode shows this warning. The deprecation policy is described in PEP 387. Exception syntax warning. Base class for warnings about dubious syntax. Exception runtime warning. Base class for warning about dubious runtime behavior. Exception future warning. Base class for warnings about deprecated features when those warnings are intended for end users of applications that are written in Python. Exception import warning. Base class for warnings about probable mistakes in module imports. Ignored by the default warning filters, enabling the Python development mode shows this warning. Exception Unicode warning. Base class for warnings related to Unicode. Exception encoding warning. Base class for warnings related to encoding. See opt-in encoding warnings. Exception bytes warning. Base class for warnings related to bytes and byte array. Exception resource warning. Base class for warnings related to resource usage. Ignored by the default warning filters, enabling the Python development mode shows this warning. Exception groups. The following are used when it is necessary to raise multiple unrelated exceptions. They are part of the exception hierarchy, so they can be handled with except like all other exceptions. In addition, they are recognized by except star, which matches their subgroups based on the types of the contained exceptions. Exception exception group message excs exception base exception group message comma excs. Both of these exception types wrap the exceptions in the sequence excs. The message parameter must be a string. The difference between the two classes is that base exception group extends base exception and it can wrap any exception, while exception group extends exception and it can only wrap subclasses of exception. This design is so that except exception catches an exception group but not base exception group. The base exception group constructor returns an exception group rather than base exception group if all contained exceptions are exception instances, so it can be used to make the selection automatic. The exception group constructor, on the other hand, raises a type error if the if any contained exception is not an exception subclass. Message. The message argument to the constructor, this is a read-only attribute. Exceptions. A tuple of the exceptions in the excs sequence given to the constructor. This is a read-only attribute. Subgroup condition returns an exceptions group that contains only the exceptions from the current group that match condition, or none if the result is empty. The condition can be either a function that accepts an exception and returns true for those that should be in the group, or it can be an exception type or a tuple of exception types which is used to check for a match using the same check, and that is used in an except clause. The nesting structure of the current exception is preserved in the result, as are the values of its messages, traceback, cause, context, notes, fields. Empty nested groups are omitted from the result. The condition is checked for all exceptions in the nested exceptions group, including the top level and any nested exception groups. If the condition is true for such an exception group, it is included in the result in full. Split condition like subgroup but returns the pair match comma rest, where match is a subgroup condition and rest is a remaining non-matching part. Derive excs. Return an exception subgroup with the same message but which wraps the exceptions in excs. This method is used by subgroup and split. A subclass needs to override it in order to make subgroup and split return instances of the subclass rather than exception group. Subgroup and split copy the traceback, cause, context, notes, fields from the original exception group to the one returned by derive. So these fields do not need to be updated by derive. Class my group. Okay. Let's do an example. And now print match rest value. So class my group exception group diff derive self excs return my group self dot message excs e is equal to my group eq value error 1 type error 2 e dot add not a not e dot context is equal to exception context e dot cause is equal to exception cause try raise e exception as e exec it is equal to e. Now exec dot split value error match rest print match comma rest. Let's see example subgroup. Okay, match value error 1 subgroup exception rest 2 type error 1 sub exception. Match dot context match dot nodes run sub exception context cause a not rest dot context rest dot cause rest dot nodes rest dot context rest dot node. Note the base exception group defines a new, so subclasses that need a different constructor signature need to override that rather than init. For example, the following defines an exception group subclass which accepts all an exit code and constructs the group's message from it. This one. Let's do the example. Class error exception group diff new cls errors exit code self is equal to super dot new errors f exit code errors self dot exit code is equal to exit code return self derive self excs return errors excs self dot exit code. Now like exception group any subclass of base exception which is also a subclass of exception can only wrap instances of exception. Match rest is equal to my group instead of my group errors not add try lazy exception rest value error print match. Errors dot underscore new cls exit code xx it shouldn't be here, it should be here. Super.new errors, errors. Example of here is the message and here errors exit code. Errors exit code. New error missing one original exit code. Errors exit code. Errors exit. Exception hierarchy. The class hierarchy for built-in exceptions: base exception, group, generator exit, keyboard interrupt, system exit exception. In exception: arithmetic error, floating point error, overflow error, zero division error, assertion error, attribute error, buffer error, EOF error, exception group, base exception, group import error, module not found error, lookup error, index error, key error, memory error, name error, unbound locator error, OS error, blocking IO error, child process error, connection error, broken pipe error, connection aborted error, connection refused error, connection reset error, file exist error, file not found error, interrupted error, is a directory error, not a directory error, permission error, process lookup error, timeout error, reference error, runtime error, not implemented error, recursion error, stop async iteration, stop iteration, syntax error, indentation error, tab error, system error, type error, value error, Unicode decode error, Unicode encode error, Unicode translate error, warnings, bytes warning, deprecation warning, encoding warning, future warning, import warning, pending deprecation warning, resource warning, runtime warning, syntax warning, Unicode warning, user warning. Let's see this one. Thank you.